Who dat to you, Saints fans? Welcome into the Who Dat Confessional Podcast, episode 710, where we have not only the start of the NBA season, shout out to our New Orleans Pelicans, Zion Williamson, Ingram, Herb Jones getting the start, CJ McCollum, Valanciunas, and everybody else coming home 1-0 against the Memphis Grizzlies. And I don't want to hear anything about, but there's no Steven Adams, or no, Ja Morant. A win is a win. So shout out to the Pelicans starting off strong. We got to give love to our New Orleans teams, but also we got to talk about New Orleans Saints today, give you an update on the injury report tonight. The Buccaneers are going to be taking on the Buffalo Bills. Obviously, Saints fans hopefully are watching that one very closely. You need every NFC South team to continue losing if you are like me and still hoping for this team to find a way to win, find a way to end up in the playoffs. That will be tonight, starting a little bit halfway through this podcast as we get going, taking on the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo. And if Buffalo can move to 5-3, that means the Bucs will fall to 3-4, and New Orleans will need to beat the Colts this upcoming weekend, which obviously be a matchup that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. But before we get started, we'll do like we always do. Part of the show is the fact that y'all are the show. The community is what makes this so amazing. So shout out to those who are here so far. T5 the Great, Lester, Tyler Guillory, Rainey, Jay Ortiz, 992 Ras, Vlad, Shakal, Mac, Tanzino, Mr. Jerry in the house as well. Probably the most prolific supporter of all of the podcast Who Dat Nation out there. Rainey, good to see you. Good to see you as well. Dr. Billy Oshie, one of our moderators here. Gundam, Zoe, Jay Ortiz. Who Dat to everybody coming on in. I know we all are popping in through the Discords as well. So what we're going to do to start off tonight is kind of what we've been doing a lot on these Thursday episodes is we're going to hit you with the injury report to start. That way y'all can kind of have an idea of where New Orleans is going to hopefully be healthy and be at going into this game. If you haven't already, though, I am going to go do a quick plug. If you haven't already, check out the film studies from this week. We did a film study on Andres Pete, which still might be relevant. Andres Pete is probably going to have some level of play this week, so good to go ahead and watch that one if you haven't. I'd also put up film study about why Chris Olave does not deserve the majority of the blame game that's been played a lot this past week, and it's actually been really wild. We've had Chase Daniels, former New Orleans Saints quarterback, come out and do a film study. We had JT O'Sullivan do a film study. We had Kurt Warner talking about Jeff Schwartz. The fact that the New Orleans Saints quarterback situation is getting such attention from all over the place is probably an indication that we're in like hell at the moment, but whatever. Let's talk about the injury report as of right now. So the Saints injury report is a little bit long, but a lot of that is limited participation. So these are guys who we expect to play. But James Hurst is still a DNP with his ankle injury. Alvin Kamara returned to practice in a full manner today. He had an illness, as did, though, Max Garcia, Jimmy Graham, Marcus May. Illness apparently going around. Whether that illness was having to watch the tape on Monday or whether there was something spike in the gumbo, I don't know. Well, if it was on Monday, it would have been red beans and rice. But they have returned to practice. So Alvin Kamara is full. Jawan Johnson is back to practicing on that calf that he injured a few weeks ago against Tampa Bay. JT Gray actually went from practicing to DNP, dealing with a hamstring injury. Landon Young, one of the backup tackles, is back in practice, going well. Ryan Ramczyk, concussion protocol last week, playing now. There was actually an article done. I talked about this earlier. Now, somebody need to go and pull up this information. Guess what? Somebody else had the same thought as well. So far this season, across any team, if you've got a concussion, you've missed at least one game. Nobody has been cleared to return to a game following a concussion. So if you get a concussion right now, it seems it is a guaranteed single game miss. That could be some policy change that the NFL is doing, something, that they're trying to push player safety. But somebody actually went and looked around the league. Everybody's done that. So Ryan Ramczyk back into full. Demario Davis, who's been dealing with a knee injury, did play last week. We expect him to play after this mini bye. He's limited. We've got Honey Badger with his foot limited. Marcus May, hamstring again / illness, limited. Taysom Hill with a chest contusion. He's limited. But now you have Alante Taylor added to the list today with limited. Max Garcia with the illness, limited. And then Jimmy Graham. Should also be noticed that, or should be noted that some of these like Jimmy Graham, Ryan Ramczyk, there's going to be a lot of the like veteran rest type thing going on. Now over to the Colts side, the Baltimore Colts, at least that's what they used to be. Indianapolis Colts have got Juju Brents, quadricep, DNP, Kylan Granson, concussion, DNP. Do not expect to see Kyle Granson in this game. Again, what did I just push? We see consistently, and this is probably a good thing. Obviously, as a fan, it sucks to not see your players on the field. But honestly, when it comes to head injuries and things like that, that probably is a good thing that they're not having those guys hit the tape right now and hit the field. So he's DNP. Don't expect him to participate. If you're curious how much of an impact he was actually having on the field, which again, it's going to kind of vary based on what you feel is valuable. But he has been their leading tight end, a little under 200 yards receiving and a touchdown. And he's been their primary tight end target. Not astounding numbers, but numbers. Defensive tackle Eric Johnson, the second, is DNP. Zach Moss has gone from DNP to limited. I did talk about some of the great running backs with Etienne last week, but Zach Moss has been the one that was leading the league in rushing yards and everything. He's been a stout guy, going to put the New Orleans Saints rush defense to the test. And then you've got Braden Smith as a DNP at tackle for them. Now, they do have a really nice offensive line. I tend to think that they're a really good offensive line, but we'll continue to look at it. And with you expecting to have Minshew Mania, could be an interesting game to see how it goes. Randy says, I'm old, decrepit, kind of like MT, but I will say this about MT. He's on the field, he's playing, and Michael Thomas is currently on pace for over 900 yards receiving. Just need to get a few more of those end zone tutties. But yeah, your leading receiver is still Chris Olave, but Michael Thomas has passed Rashid Shaheed as the number 2 in terms of overall yards, which I think, hey, kudos to him. I said it coming into the season. I wouldn't say I was critical, but I said it was going to be tough for me to envision Michael Thomas coming back in a really big way, and he's done better than I expected. So shout out to Michael Thomas for coming in and I think doing a pretty decent job. That's not even fair to say pretty decent. I think the man's doing a damn good job, all things considered. Giovanni says, I was watching highlights from the Seahawks playoff game in 2013, and we could have won that game if we kept running the ball against Legion of Boom. Speaking of running the ball, I'm glad you bring this up, hence why I read the comment. I think the New Orleans Saints are going to be in a similar position where they need to have some more ball control offense. And we talk about this, it gets a little cliche to continue to bring these things up, but the key for beating the Colts is stopping the run, and I also think controlling the narrative and controlling the game through that has got to be something, because the Saints offense has been 11th in rushing attempts across the league. So they've tried, but they've only been 22nd in rushing yards. So the New Orleans Saints are actually trying to get out there and run. They are trying to utilize that as their offense, but it's not been very successful. Now, I will say that I believe it's gotten more successful in recent weeks. I do still have some questions about some of the decisions they make of how they're doing certain things. Raheem, Nikki DeFish, Vlad, etc. Hudak, good to see y'all in. For example, I question, why are we not really using Jamal Williams and some of those red zone opportunities, especially inside the 5, inside the 10. That's what he was used so well for in Detroit, hence why he had 17 touchdowns. New Orleans hasn't really used him here. Now, as far as the Indianapolis Colts go, this is where you also have to pay attention. They are 9th in attempts, but they are 9th in yards in rushing and 3rd in the NFL in touchdowns. This is a run-first team. You don't really say that very much in today's NFL and today's offenses, but they truly are a team that runs the ball as a focal point. To put it at this point, they have 206 rushing attempts so far this season to 245 passing attempts. So, yes, there are more passing attempts, but you're talking about a team that is dedicated to running the ball. By comparison, we talk about where the Saints were just at. Well, the Saints have got 199 attempts. They've yet to eclipse 200, yet they have 275 passing attempts. So they are getting closer to 300. Now, some of that is going to come down to style of play, context of in the game. Are you losing? When you're losing, obviously you're going to pass more. But this is definitely a team with the Indianapolis Colts. They want to run the ball, and they want to be effective at it. And this is where it's going to come down to how effective actually are the Saints at stopping that. If you're curious, the Saints' rushing defense numbers, they are the 5th best team in the NFL in allowing rushing touchdowns, as in they are not allowing them. And when it comes to overall yards, they are 12th. In attempts, they are 10th. So the rushing defense has been a stark improvement from last year, which was a step back, where Dennis Allen had 3 straight years where they're basically a top 5, or honestly 4 straight years where they're a top 5 rushing defense. And they're getting back to that. But one thing that Cameron Jordan noted in a press conference today is that, they've got to also stop these runs from the quarterback. When the quarterback gets out and when the quarterback is making plays, well, that's going to hurt you. And he talked about how that was like their leading rushes for the Jaguars were the getaways by Trevor Lawrence. And those are just plays they can't allow to happen. Now, I do want to throw in real quick, because we're talking about injuries. Remember, Anthony Richardson, the rookie quarterback that the Colts went and grabbed, he's not on the injury report, but that's because he's on IR. And there's a lot of names on their IR. Here's who's on their IR. They got Jannard Avery, which is a name some of y'all might recognize as a defensive end. They've got Doolin Ashton. They've got Dallas Flowers. They've got Evan Hull, Titus Leo, Danny Pinter. Now, some of these y'all aren't going to recognize. Some of you will. Anthony Richardson, Daniel Scott. That should be a name maybe y'all recognize from game play, or rookie coming in from the draft process. Jake Witt, Jelani Woods. I mean, they have got a lot of guys, particularly the quarterback being the biggest one, which means that they've had to rely on Gardner Minshew to come in. And Minshew Mania, I know that it was a thing back in the day, but Minshew Mania has been, well, to go ahead and kind of like drive the point home, Minshew Mania has been very much like a New Orleans Saints quarterback lately. Minshew Mania is throwing at 65-ish%, 5 TDs to 4 interceptions. Only 42% of his throws are successful throws, as in they're getting to or around the yards needed to complete a first down, as well as having taken 12 sacks so far in 3 starts, a 7% sack percentage. That's pretty rough if you're curious where that compares to Derek Carr. Derek Carr's at 6.6. So we talk about the problems with the Saints offensive line. Well, it's actually been worse for Gardner Minshew here in that short amount of time. And if you can, it's the same kind of strategy I talked about the Jacksonville Jaguars. Same kind of strategy. If you can force the quarterback to be the one that wins. And you know what? The Saints did a good job of that, and Jacksonville won. I think a lot of Saints fans will argue that the New Orleans Saints lost it, but Jacksonville put it on Trevor, and Trevor Lawrence made some great runs, made some great plays to keep it going. Well, you need to do that same thing with Gardner Minshew. I think the difference is, though, you don't trust Gardner Minshew to be near as good at that as Trevor Lawrence was, right? Now, I'm not saying that Gardner Minshew can't run, but Gardner Minshew is not going to rattle off a 30-yard run on you like Trevor Lawrence did and then come back and throw a 40-yard pass that he can. These are the opportunities that the New Orleans Saints have to try to take advantage of. And the Saints on the opposite side have got to play better as well. Gundam says, do you think Derek Carr will pull the trigger, take the shots down the field? I think the biggest thing is, and it was really interesting, I mentioned this at the beginning of the show, really interesting seeing so many different voices speaking out about the New Orleans Saints quarterback. You have Chase Daniel, who played in the NFL for 14 years and actually played in this system for, 5, 6 of those. You have JT O'Sullivan, who has had over 10 years of professional football experience, both in New Orleans, both in the NFL. He was in NFL Europe's, I think it was co-offensive MVP. They had a different reward system there, NFL Europe and the CFL. And then you even had Kurt Warner coming through talking about the Saints blitz pickup package. So we've had a lot of focuses on Derek Carr and his quarterback play. And I think a lot of it is a combination of, again, there's so many variables to this. And, it's not to make excuses for anybody. I just think that it's not an easy yes or no. I think one thing that if you watch that Jacksonville tape, I simply go like, man, it just feels like he was hearing footsteps a lot. He was getting the ball out too quick sometimes. And I know Chase Daniel, if y'all didn't catch his film study, he mentioned that, that there were opportunities there that he simply didn't take. And I put that in my Chris Olave film study. There were at least 2 touchdowns on deep post routes splitting that middle of the field that were right there, and there were definitely some good plays that, you'll find some disagreements on, because if you watch the JT O'Sullivan tape, it seems like, oh, wow, all this is Derek Carr and he's terrible. Then you go watch Chase Daniels and you're like, hey, Derek Carr is actually not that big of a deal. It's more issues otherwhere. And then you get Kurt Warner coming through, giving his opinion. So I think the truth of it is this whole New Orleans Saints situation is so multifaceted in its problems, and that's a big negative, that they've got to find a way to fix it. Now, let's talk about, are they doing anything to actually fix it? Gundam, you've kind of opened a can of worms, so we might as well talk about it. So Derek Carr came out and said, and I've been very vocal, that the biggest thing for me about Derek Carr, what I strongly disagree with, was how he's yelling at Chris Olave on the field. He said that this past week he reached out to a lot of the players individually in a different way than he's done before, as in he's going to them one by one, making sure they're on the right page. He said that him and Chris Olave are good, but he went beyond that, saying that he talked to Demario Davis about getting advice, as in comparing notes. And he made the point to say in the interview, this was with The Advocate, by the way, if y'all haven't read the article, it was on The Advocate, saying that he's trying to go out of his way to not only become a better leader for this team, but to also make sure that all communication problems that they are experiencing go away. So he was talking to Alvin Kamara privately. He was comparing notes to Demario Davis and asking Demario Davis for advice. He said he had very lengthy conversations with Eric McCoy with the offensive line stuff. So all of these things are great. I do appreciate him, seeing that he's part of the problem. Now, again, I've used this word a lot this week. I don't believe that absolves him of anything. The only thing that absolves Derek Carr of issues is if he comes out and throws 300 yards, 3 TDs, looks great, and the offense wins 27-13, and you finally go, wow, it wasn't amazing, but it looks better. So all of this just comes back to, does Derek Carr actually improve? Does Derek Carr actually have improvement for his play, and let alone the play that you need on the offensive line, where hopefully Ryan Ramczyk coming back helps out? And then also, better usage of guys like Alvin Kamara, because when we talk about Zach Moss on the opposite side of this, matchup here, well, Zach Moss is a guy who's over 500 yards rushing already, also has 100 yards receiving. Zach Moss is close to 650 total yards of offense. Zach Moss is going to be the primary threat for this team. If you're wondering who the primary receiver is for the Colts, it's going to be Michael Pittman Jr., and he also is having a good season. But I think matchup-wise, the New Orleans Saints should be able to go in. They're going against a less talented team than Jacksonville Jaguars, but really don't want to make it sound like I believe that they can just go out and blow the Indianapolis Colts out the water. They are going against a lesser talented team. If they play how they did against Jacksonville and manage to just improve slightly on offense, they are the better team. But this is an away game. This is a Colts team that is competitive. If you haven't followed any of their games this season, well, it started off pretty strong, right? They started off 2-1. One of those being an overtime win over the Baltimore Ravens, and now they're coming off 2 straight losses to the Jaguars and Cleveland Browns. And, the Gardner Minshew thing is kind of part of that, right? They had that win against Tennessee, which was a tight one. Obviously, the Tennessee win is going back to the beginning of this month, and that's where you had Gardner Minshew making his kind of first start. And it wasn't even really a start. He came in, that's when you had Anthony Richardson get injured. And then after that, it's just kind of been a whole bunch of, woof, okay, that's getting kind of scary. Now, in terms of snap count, I think Gardner Minshew actually ends up getting credit for the win in that one because he actually played more snaps, did more in that game. Not that I'm trying to take anything from Anthony Richardson, but pretty sure Gardner Minshew's listed as the win. But this also goes back to why I say wins aren't a quarterback stat, because if you go by starts, they've yet to win with him as the starting quarterback so far. But if you go on the stat sheet, it's listed as like 1 and 2. But if I remember correctly, and Chad can correct me if I'm wrong, that Tennessee game is actually where Richardson goes down, and he was the one that actually started it. Taylor, good to see you. Says drop a like if you haven't yet. Appreciate it. Just hoping to give you through all the details. Appreciate. And also, if you haven't seen it already, we did share the Chase Daniel film study out on Twitter, but we can also share it out on the Discord. I don't know if we've done it there yet or not. Check it out. If we haven't, we'll share it out for you so that you can see it. But check out that. It's a really good one. Again, I actually had this conversation with several people earlier, and I think it's important because there's so many people in Saints social media who are just trying to pick a side, right? And I get it. Emotions run high. You get really attached to the game. But truth is, there's so much that you can learn from both sides of this. And whether I think the thing that if you're a Saints fans coming into this and you're watching these film studies trying to find the answer, because this is how I try to do it, but I can admit that I'm not perfect, right? Like everybody has some level of innate bias. When you look at the JT O'Sullivan, if you watch that by itself, you're going to come out saying Derek Carr's trash. And if you watch the Chase Daniel one, you're going to look at that and go, wow, Chase Daniel is strongly disagreeing, saying that Derek Carr's a really good quarterback. Kurt Warner has said that Derek Carr's a great quarterback. And the truth is there's something in the middle there where all things can be true and all things can be false at the same time. There are layers to it. And the truth is there's several things that Derek Carr can fix, but the offense can also fix. And for me, the big harping point has been the offensive play calling, which Marcus Spears called out. And it was really weird to see Marcus Spears call that out because when they were talking on TV, nobody was even talking about Pete Carmichael. He just like straight up said, pause, Pete Carmichael, I see you and you're not doing good. I'm like, well, okay, just calling out Carmichael for no reason. So there are a lot of issues with the Saints offense. And I think the Indianapolis Colts provide an opportunity to try to rebound against it. There is a one big glaring issue though. If there is an area of the defense that has been pretty successful for the Indianapolis Colts, it has been their passing defense. In fact, they're ranked 5th in touchdown passes allowed and 10th in their interception ranking. So they are finding ways to get the ball, force turnovers, and make good plays. Now, If you're curious who's been like the weak point on their team when it comes to the analytics side of things, I don't have any clips I can throw up for you. I'll give you some of the analytics side of things. You go the targeted rating for their starters. That would be their linebacker. Cue the Alvin Kamara needs to come in and play. Zari Franklin is 101 QB rating when targeted right now, and he's been targeted 35 times the linebacker position. Teams have been trying to take advantage of his spot on the field. In fact, their entire linebacker core has been targeted very heavily, but their starting corners have played very well. Like Kenny Moore, for example, has only allowed 1 touchdown, but has also reeled in an interception. Julian Blackmon at safety over there in the backfield has yet to allow a TD and has got 2 interceptions to his credit so far. So these are things that the New Orleans Saints are going to have to come into where the opportunity to have success is actually against the run game, which should hopefully, in theory, open up the New Orleans Saints play action game, which we haven't seen them use a lot of, right? This should be a game that Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, and hopefully Kendre Miller have a bigger impact because rushing defense, they're 31st in the NFL in terms of touchdowns allowed rushing, and they are 21st in yards rushing allowed. So this is a Colts defense that is not bad, but if they have a weakness, it's the part of the game that you need the Saints to actually start utilizing, which is the run game. That has been the issue that we focus so much on the pass game, but I believe a lot of the passing game problems for New Orleans comes down to, in my opinion, simply they're one-dimensional. Like you'll get into those issues like the play calling. Remember we talked about play calling where in the Texans game they called 4 verts 3 times out of 4 plays? Well, your team is one-dimensional by that point. You know, you look at some of the other things that have happened where there's 2-minute drill on either side of the ball. You know, just these things are part of being a one-dimensional team where you haven't had a consistent, reliable running attack and you haven't had a play action attack that you're utilizing with any form of success. I think that's where the Saints' opportunity is. And if those things start kicking up, it becomes easier to get through and go through the passing game. And when you're not one-dimensional, then your progressions actually become easier because if you look and you go back and look at the film study with Chris Olave, you look at the coverages that they're running, those Tampa 2 coverages where the only thing they allow is underneath and they're bringing in, green dog blitzers and, Derek Carr's having to fly through his progressions and make good or bad decisions, a lot of bad decisions against Jacksonville. And these things are all because they know that they can just pin their ears back against New Orleans and finding that balance, having a passing attack that's respected, but built upon who is, in my opinion, your star still in this game. And Alvin Kamara opens up the New Orleans Saints for better success if they can start utilizing. But I think that also, and chat, feel free to chime in here, I think that also means that why is Jamal Williams not being utilized in the red zone? I think that is an issue they got to look at. I think Alvin Kamara is going to be used better in the passing game, though. What's wild is Alvin Kamara's only played 4 games. He's got over 400 yards from scrimmage. Alvin Kamara is averaging over 100 yards from scrimmage right now, and that toll it's quite hefty. And Dr. Billy Oshie, brings it up here in the chat. Why is Williams not being used correctly? And let's actually pull up Jamal Williams. Now, keep in mind that he's only been in 3 games, right? So these are going to be limited numbers. But here are the splits for Jamal Williams. It's going to be kind of maybe a little bit shocking. Inside the 10-yard line, he has run the ball 1 time. Once. That's it. And it was a 2-yard loss. And that's the only time Jamal Williams has run the ball inside the 10. Once. Now keep in mind, I'm not saying this is over 7 games. It's just 3 games. But 1 time. The guy who had 17 touchdowns for the Detroit Lions last year. And by the way, if you're curious, how many of those touchdowns came inside the 10 or the red zone? Well, funny you might ask. 15 of them. Last year, Jamal Williams, 15 of his touchdowns came inside the 10. Now, you would expect that with the style of back that he is, right? This is clearly the style of runner that Jamal Williams, and that's why we talked about like his yards per carry were going to be kind of low. Don't expect him to really dominate between the 20s. We talked about all that leading into this season. Like you brought in Jamal Williams, like, hey, he's not the guy that you give the ball 300 times and he just dominates up and down the field, but he's a hammer in the red zone. Well, he's had 1 carry inside the 10. 1. And last year he had 15 touchdowns. And I believe that regression is a thing, right? But I really don't believe that Jamal Williams went from 27 years old, 15 touchdowns inside the 10-yard line, became 28, and now can't do anything. So it's when they're using them, right? So if you go into his actual splits, how they've actually utilized him so far this season, I'll give you the numbers. So far this season in the red zone, they have used him a total of 5 carries, right? That's inside the 20. That's not, so they've only used him once inside the 10. Inside the 20, from 20 to 0, been used 5 times. However, on the opposite side of the field, as in New Orleans Saints territory, inside the New Orleans Saints 21 through 50, he's been run 12 times. Now, I'm not saying there's anything problematic with that, but of his carries, most of his carries are coming between the 20s, when his whole thing is inside the 20s. Has always been his thing. He's a short yardage power guy who loves duo blocking, power blocking, and the New Orleans Saints have shown that they can do that, grind it out. And look at what they did with the Colin Saunders fullback method. They brought in extra offensive linemen. They made a way and forced it to happen. And to be very clear, this is not me like trying to hate on Jamal Williams. I don't think that he's out of it, right? But let's look at Alvin Kamara, who's only played 4 games. Alvin Kamara has not exactly been here the entire season either. We know that he served his suspension. But Alvin Kamara, inside the 10, has been used 9 times. Alvin Kamara's entire thing is space. Now, I don't have any problem with calling Alvin Kamara inside the 10. I don't. Alvin Kamara is special. I have no problem with calling him inside the 10. But for you to give him 9 plays inside the 10 and Jamal Williams 1, just feels like you're missing an opportunity to use your personnel to the best possible effect, right? And again, Jamal Williams, I think, can still be a hammer. Alvin Kamara has always been a guy in space, and that's why Alvin Kamara, between the opponents 49 through 20, is averaging 4.7 yards per carry. And this is also part of why, like, when people tell me, oh, Alvin Kamara is struggling, oh, Alvin Kamara is only averaging like 3.6 yards per carry right now. I'm sorry, 3.8. Alvin Kamara is averaging 3.8 yards per carry, and people are like, oh, well, he's definitely taking a step back. I'm like, no, he hasn't. You know why? I can prove to you why. Between the 20s, as in New Orleans 20 and opponents 20, he's averaging 4.7 yards per carry, which is where he's always dominated. And then that doesn't mean that, like, he sucks in the end zone. I'm just saying that they're giving all those red zone touches to Alvin Kamara when they went and signed Jamal Williams to be the red zone touch guy. And I get it. Alvin Kamara is a special player. You give him some opportunities. The argument that I'm making is that you're not giving any opportunities to the guy that you brought in to do these opportunities, right? So Alvin Kamara is still clearly effective in the space area that he's always been good at. I think they just need to make sure they're actually using the 1-2 punch, because right now they're just doing the one and then the one again 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 and the one again. And, well, shocking, Alvin Kamara averages less than 2 yards per carry inside the 10. Not that there's much yards there to be made, but that's not his efficiency zone, right? I would actually argue that it's easier for Alvin Kamara to score at the 15 to the 0 than from the 5 to the 0, just because that's not his style, right? But the Saints can do it. And how do I know the Saints can do it? So glad that you asked. How do I know the Saints can do it? Taysom Hill does it. So I know the Saints can do it. I mean, I don't think that Taysom Hill is just that much better inside the 10 than Jamal Williams, which, by the way, inside the 10, Taysom Hill has 6 attempts. So again, we have a guy who is not getting the touches that can be effective there. So that's why when I look at this Colts game, the running game is so big for me, because yes, I want the passing game to be better, but I think the passing game getting better is built on the running game doing what it wants to do and being utilized correctly. Rubber Johnny into the chat, I think, says it perfectly. Pete is overthinking things. That's what I would say. Like, it's the little things that I talk about being too cute for your own good. You know, there was a play in the Chris Olave film study I put out where they run the Yankee concept, no problem with the Yankee concept, but the person that they put out there to split the deep defenders was Keith Kirkwood. And I'm not trying to dump on Keith Kirkwood, but you put Chris Olave underneath, fine, cool. Hopefully you can get some yak. But if your goal is to get Chris Olave yards after catch, that means you have to have somebody that's actually going to be a threat to hit the deep route that they're going to cover it. Well, if Keith Kirkwood is the guy running the post route, they're not going to hold the safety back. The safety's going to scream down and go after Chris Olave. But what if that had been Rashid Shaheed? So I think a lot of the things here is there's too many things of like trying to be cute or not thinking about the little details that can really change the impact of the game. And again, this isn't shade throwing Keith Kirkwood, but when he's your primary alert and he's that big read to draw the safety's not going to respect Keith Kirkwood, but they'll respect Chris Olave or Rashid Shaheed running that deep post with a 15-yard break. They have to respect it because those two guys will get on top of you and it's a big touchdown. But if the whole design was to drag the safety back so that Chris Olave can be open underneath, then Keith Kirkwood's not the guy either. It's the same thing with the running, right? Like Jamal Williams needs to be a guy getting opportunities inside the 5 and the 10. And guess what? If Jamal Williams gets 10 carries inside the 10 and he sucks, well, then we'll have that conversation when it's time to have that conversation. But the New Orleans Saints, if they want to get their offense better, and the Colts are a great place to start, they've got to start just simply taking advantage of what they have. They have some good personnel. I'm not saying position by position are the best offense personnel-wise in the league, but there are opportunities to have success, and the Saints just simply have to capitalize on those opportunities by putting players in the best position to have success. Dupree says the big problem on offense is that I still don't know what our identity is 7 games into the season. What is our strength on offense? What can we rely on? I think your strength on offense is intermediate crossing patterns, your outside zone running game, and then your power run game inside the 10 that we got a little bit of a glimpse of against Jacksonville. And I know it's really tough to look at the Jacksonville game and say, hey, they moved in a good direction. But when you saw the Colin Saunders stuff, but beyond that, the extra personnel coming in, running these hardcore, almost like single wing type looks, like everybody's at the line. It's all big griefers. It's all big hog mollies. Yeah, I mean, they're finding their identity, but it sucks that you're finding that 7 games into a season, right? Like you want to have a good idea of what you are before then, instead of, I hate to use the word like floundering, but it's felt like that's what it's been for a while. And then the 2-minute drill, clearly they have a good understanding of their 2-minute drill, because when Derek Carr entered into the 2-minute drill, he was calling those set of plays. The offense started moving and banging. But you can't run a 2-minute drill the entire 60 minutes, right? There's a reason it's a 2-minute drill. It's limited. You can take advantage with it. You can score with it, and you can utilize it effectively. But it's kind of like you said, man, they've got to get their identity really set. And it just feels like little things that they're missing opportunities on, right? I love that they finally got back to using Alvin Kamara inside the 20s, and you actually started to see the third down conversion and everything start to go up. How do I know that? For example, Alvin Kamara, when it comes to creating those third downs or creating first downs, he's got 14 first downs running in between the 20s. That's really good numbers. I mean, we like that. We like to see that. He's also got 6 more receiving ones, by the way. So that means he's got 20 first downs between the 20s and his touches. That's good numbers. Like, you want to see more of that continue. You just need to start taking advantage of guys that are there. And another example is, hey, the guy was called Slant Boy for 1 billion years, and yet now we're not running slants with him. Run slants with Michael Thomas. Attack the middle of the field. That's what this team has personnel-wise to be good with. They just need to actually start utilizing it. And then we'll see if this team can have success. And again, this is the great opportunity, because the Indianapolis Colts as a defense are built to lose to that style of running. As in, the New Orleans Saints, if they do what we look at them and think they should be able to do, that's what the Colts struggle with. What the Colts don't struggle with is if you're trying to play air raid and go full, air Coryell or air raid off. If you're trying to just push the ball repeatedly downfield, they've actually been really good at fighting that, right? What they haven't been great at fighting at is if you're trying to do the West Coast style offense, which is short, underneath, quick passes, taking advantage of the short intermediate part of the field, hitting with those wide zone run concepts. That's what Indianapolis has not been great against. So if the New Orleans Saints can put that together, we're going to see a very, very different game. Rubber says Pete calls plays like we're not talented enough to line up and beat the defense. Take what the defense gives you mentality. This offense is too talented for that. I think a big thing, Alvin Kamara talked about this after the game, is that, especially in the passing game, they used to win, especially when Sean was here, they played matchup ball. They tried to find matchups and take advantage of those. And then part of the matchup issues are, one, the communication things that they've kind of talked about, but also just 2, misses. One thing that comes to mind, and it was the most talked about play from this past game, was the play where Derek Carr shoots down the sideline and starts chewing out Chris Olave. Well, I mean, the matchup that they wanted and got was Taysom Hill. And then Derek Carr screwed the pooch. He didn't throw the ball. Derek Carr is the one that, gets screamed at there, and said Chris Olave is getting screamed at, but Derek Carr is the one that missed, right? So they have those opportunities. They just need to start capitalizing, taking advantage of them. I hope the conversations that this team has been having this week, because, I realize that players talk, and maybe I'm being too optimistic, but one thing that they all have kind of mentioned is that beyond just the practice, they're talking. Back beyond all that stuff, they're still trying to make it work together, right? Alvin Kamara, I think, has stood up and been a great leader. Michael Thomas has been very vocal of his support for everybody on this offense and trying to make it work. And whether it works or doesn't work, well, we can handle what moves we make at the end of the season. It's very clear at this point, New Orleans Saints aren't making any drastic changes. If you want a new play caller, well, this would have been the week to do a new play caller, so that doesn't seem like it's going to happen. And if you wanted a new quarterback to step in, this would have been the week. That isn't going to happen. So the Saints are choosing to run what they brung. And it's a very dangerous bet for Dennis Allen, because I struggle to believe Pete can change a lot of his ways. But at the same time, there's also the hope that the players overcome coaching, right? And if the players get their stuff together, then maybe, just maybe, it can work. Amuse Batman says, if I could the rest of my life without hearing about that play again, it'd be too soon. I do think that of all the plays I got focused on, that was an odd one for me. Like, I honestly would have expected people to focus more on the Rashid Shaheed touchdown miss or even the interception. But instead, that play, and the reason that play got focused on so much obviously had to do with with Derek Carr going after Chris Olave. But as plays go, there are way worse plays that, like, if you're trying to see this offense be better, that exist, but there are also some really good ones. And that's also part of the frustration, is if you go back and look at this game, like go through the box score, go through the play-by-play list, the stats are ugly. But yet there were also some really good plays. So what I mean by the stats were ugly, they were 3 for 18 on third downs. There's no excuse for that. They didn't convert third downs. That sucked. But at the same time, there were actually some really good plays that they had and run, especially in the run game, that are easy to forget about because of some of this other stuff that we're discussing. They've got to, be more consistent with those things. And if that happens, again, the Indianapolis Colts, I'm not coming into this because I've told you 3 weeks ago that I really can't pick the Saints to win football games until we start seeing any level of consistency, right? So I still look at the Saints team and go, I don't know. I really don't. But I will say that as a whole, I think the offense has slowly, gotten better. It's just not consistent. And I would say that there are some really great plays that it's so close to being a finished product, but at the same time, it's in complete disarray. And I hope that makes sense. Hey, Peyto, good to see you. Like, the offense is equally, and I know this sounds like I'm sounding dumb, so bear with me. But the offense, as you study it, you can see that it's right there to being almost good. But at the same time, some of the mistakes that you see happening are just like, there's such a facepalm type moment. Like, how can that be happening to this team 7 games in, right? Like, it's not like when you watch the tape, the team is just bad. And I say that truthfully. Like, I don't watch this and go, Derek Carr is the worst quarterback in the NFL. I don't watch it and go, the offensive line is the worst quarterback or worst, group in the NFL. I don't look at the receivers and go, hey, Chris Olave is the worst. I don't see that. What I do see, though, is a disjointed team, right? Where some play calls will be great, followed by terrible. A great example of that, by the way, let me give you an actual example. The Foster Moreau drop was a great play designed by Pete Carmichael. And it should have been the touchdown that either tied the game or gave them the opportunity to go for 2 and win it. But the play before that, the route concepts were ridiculous. You had Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave, bottom pylons, opposite sides. And then you had Taysom Hill, Rashid Shaheed, and Michael Thomas, literally bang, 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 right up the middle. Like, I'm saying, literally at the end of the routes, all 3 of them were literally within 5 feet of each other. So the disjointness is that there can be a great play, but then there will also be like this, what the hell are you doing type moment right before. And that's the frustration for me when I watch the Saints, because I don't see any individual player just saying, man, that player is so bad, he's costing the team. It's a combination of communication, of play calling, of bad plays, a a good example. Let's talk about that Derek Carr interception, right? I know this is supposed to be talking about the Indianapolis game, but let's talk about the Derek Carr interception because Chase Daniels talked about, hey, he liked the decision. Well, I like the decision too, but I hate the ball placement, right? Like the decision to go after Rashid Shaheed there is not a bad choice. Like in terms of reading the field, it wasn't a bad choice. But the ball was up near his helmet with the defender on his back. There is a high probability that if you don't reel that in, if you don't have great hands, if that had been Michael Thomas, that's probably a catch 99 times out of 100. But if you're going to make that throw, then it needs to be low and away so that the receiver can slide down into it, and he's the only one that can make a play on it. And the worst that happens is an incomplete pass. So now we have an issue with ball placement. So there's just so many layers to each one of these plays being bad. Derek Carr made a good decision there, but threw a horrible football. And because the football was not thrown as good as it could have been, pops up. And anytime you have tip drill, defense usually has the advantage on tip drill. And when you're going into this Colts game, they're the same record as you are. You have a talented offense that's disjointed, and then you have a top 5 defense. And the Colts just honestly, without Anthony Richardson, do not have the ability to hurt the New Orleans defense like Trevor Lawrence did. The Jacksonville Jaguars are a significantly more talented team at this point right now. Now, the Indianapolis Colts, as they're rebuilding, could actually be really scary in a couple years. Like I said this in the pre-draft that Anthony Richardson is the next coming of like Cam Newton if he's healthy, which is an MVP caliber guy who can do 2 things and really hurt you. But he's not in this game. He's not going to play. It's Gardner Minshew. And their best skill position player is going to be Zach Moss. And they do have Jonathan Taylor back. Obviously, it was the whole sit-out thing. I'm not trashing Jonathan Taylor, but Zach Moss has been the focal point. This New Orleans Saints team is going against a team that is a lesser to what they just had a close last-second game against, right? Literally, it was right there. Now the Saints have actually just got to show that they can win. They got to win. Brian says, what's up? Who dat? Appreciate you saying the Saints will win 33-13. Fun fact about the Indianapolis Colts, they have yet to score less than 20 points this season. The Indianapolis Colts have yet to score less than 20 points this season. Now, they just came off a loss to the Browns where it was a shootout. So they lost 39-38. But that was, I think, I hate to use the word like misleading because you had a fumble recovery for a touchdown for the Browns. You had field goals out the wazoo. Then you had this like 75-yard TD pass at the very end of the game. And then Kareem Hunt runs it in for 1 yard at the very last like 20 seconds. It was a wild one, right? And if you look at some of the things how the Colts scored, I'll actually pull up the game right now. I'll read off how the Colts scored. And it can happen to New Orleans. It definitely can. But let me tell you how it happened. And you're going to go, well, the Saints defense doesn't really give up those type of plays. All right, so their first score was a 60-yard pass to Josh Downs from Gardner Minshew. That doesn't really, the New Orleans Saints don't give that up. Next one was a 17-yard run by Gardner Minshew. That one I'm kind of worried about. Okay, I won't lie about that one. Then Gardner Minshew for 4 yards. The Saints' run defense is better than the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns' pass rush is better than New Orleans Saints. Myles Garrett is probably the best pass rusher in the NFL right now. But then let's keep it going. Jonathan Taylor, 5-yard rush. Again, we're talking about the Saints' strength right now. Saints' strength. And then Michael Pittman, 75-yard pass. So how did the Colts score all their points? Big plays and running the ball. Well, the Saints don't give up a lot of big plays. I know they gave up the one to Christian Kirk because Honey Badger got beat on a 1-by-1. And they don't lose to the run game very often. How the Saints have gotten beat is nickel and diming them with the pass attack. If you go back and look at the scoring drive against the Saints defense, 12, 14, 16 play drives. Like they nickel and dime them, they wear them down, and then they score. So I think the big thing is if you look at this this Indianapolis team, they're not as good as Jacksonville. I think Jacksonville wins the division. You know, there's a reason that Jacksonville's 5-2. I feel like Jacksonville is the best squad in that group. And I think the New Orleans Saints can win this game, but until I see it happen, again, I'm not picking the Saints to win a game this year until we actually see the offense put out a real identity. A real identity. So if there are matchups that you want to watch, Gardner Minshew is one of them. The reason that Gardner Minshew is one of them is because, frankly, Gardner Minshew is the quarterback that you're facing this year who has the highest proclivity for throwing interceptions. Like, who's going to turn the ball over the most that you've seen so far this year is Gardner Minshew. You know, when it's crazy because when Gardner Minshew gets brought up, the one thing that always gets brought up is Minshew Mania. Well, that was like a 4-game stretch. I mean, technically, it's like a 10-game stretch. 5 years ago. What has he done since then? I'll tell you what he's done since then. This year, he's throwing 2.5 of his passes for interceptions. Last year, when he came in to play for Philly, 4% of his passes were interceptions. And he is yet to have a successful TD to INT ratio of 2-to-1 since 2020. It's a guy who'll turn the ball over, and he gets sacked a lot. You know that Gardner Minshew, over the past 4 years, is averaging getting sacked every 7.3% of his dropbacks. He doesn't get the ball out quick. He needs an offensive coordinator that helps him with his reads. He's a backup. That's just what he is. I'm not insulting him. He's Chase Daniel. You know, he's JT O'Sullivan. He's the guys who breaking down Derek Carr tape. And I still think that he's probably going to be in the league for a while because he's a solid backup. But the New Orleans Saints should take advantage of Minshew Mania. 9-2 says we can't talk Carr's averaging 1-to-1. Well, we are talking as we're talking about what can the Saints take advantage of. And to be very clear, if the Saints are going to win right now, it's by the defense until the offense finds an identity. Hence why I said I'm not picking the Saints to win until the offense finds an identity. But if you're talking matchups, I'm scared of Anthony Richardson, but he's not here. I am not scared of Gardner Minshew. Anthony Richardson in 4 games had 8 touchdowns? I think he had 8 touchdowns. He only threw 1 interception. I mean, he came in as a rookie, came in hot. So we'll see how it goes. Now, if you're curious on the other stats for the Colts, like who to watch in terms of pass rush, Samson Ebukam is going to be the big one there at the defensive end spot, as well as Kwity Paye. Neither of those are probably high-end studs. None of them are like a Josh Allen level talent. But with the New Orleans Saints probably having a Andres Pete left tackle again this game, something to keep an eye out for. Interior-wise, though, they do have DeForest Buckner. Even though he is getting a little bit long in the tooth, still a very effective interior rusher to watch out for, which is going to be watching out for Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz. How do they do? And probably Max Garcia coming in again with Andres Pete on the left side. That's what I would expect at the moment. Personally, I've already made it clear. I'd have Trevor Penning at left tackle, Andres Pete at left guard. But with Hurst, doesn't look like he's ready to go. That's who you should probably be watching out for in terms of pressure. Now, do they like to blitz? They do blitz quite a bit. In fact, they have, between Speed and Franklin, 2 of their linebackers, they've blitzed 34 times between the 2 of them. They actually don't get home on those very often. Pre says, what I don't get is that defenses are more often than not running 2 safeties deep, which means middle of the field open, generally. If it is, then I don't get why we don't attack that part of the field most of the game with all these sideline routes. It's a great question, right? And there are several different looks. Middle of the field open is a pre-snap read. Then as a quarterback, what you have to do is a post-snap read or a post-snap confirmation, because that middle of the field open could be quarters coverage. It could be cover 3 match, like they rotate out of it. The Baltimore Ravens were the team I enjoyed, also hated watching tape on the most, because they would literally all the time rotate out of everything they just showed. All the time. Just rotate straight out. They would give you a cover 1 underlook, man coverage outside, and then all of a sudden we're in too high. So you got to have that pre-snap, post-snap read and trust your reads. But either way, yeah, I do think that the New Orleans Saints struggle to attack the middle of the field. Now, what the Jacksonville Jaguars were doing, where they were running a lot of Tampa 2. Tampa 2 is 2 deep safeties, middle of the field open, but they dropped their middle linebacker into the hole to where you have to go about 5-10 yards deeper to get that middle of the field opening and take advantage of it. Chris Olave was there multiple times. They just never hit him. But you got to find ways to make it work. You can also do mesh concepts underneath. There are ways to attack a defense when it's presenting you. It doesn't matter if it's cover 6, cover 3 in match, quarters match, because the Saints love to do quarters match, and also Tampa 2. But there are ways they can do it. They just actually got to get out there and do it. Paul says the Colts will be the Saints this weekend. They have an offensive identity. And I can't really argue that. I don't think that they're playmakers are as good as the New Orleans Saints, but I won't deny that they are more consistent in their offensive identity. And I do think that that matters. I think that is a good point that you brought up. And I will also throw this in, though. Watch the matchup between Michael Pittman Jr. and Marshawn Lattimore. Why? Because Pittman, even though he's their leading receiver, 4 of the interceptions, so there's been 5 interceptions thrown by the Colts. 4 of the interceptions that have been thrown by the Colts were targeting Michael Pittman Jr. This is a matchup where hopefully Marshawn Lattimore gets that INT that was robbed of him against the Jaguars. Now, when you look at Pittman, because he's a big dude, like he's 6'4", 225-ish, he's a big wide receiver. You would expect him to be more physical than he is. And I'm not calling him soft, like his name is not Sharman Pittman Jr., but I am saying that targeting him, he doesn't have the same level of fight. He doesn't have the same level of, turn into a DB if I need to, as maybe other guys. 4 of the interceptions this team has thrown have gone to Michael Pittman Jr. I expect Marshawn Lattimore to have a good matchup because Lattimore typically does better against larger wide receivers. Look at his career against Mike Evans. So hopefully we have a difference coming through. By the way, for those who want a quick score update, Buffalo Bills playing the Buccaneers are winning 3-0, but that is obviously way too early to tell. They just entered into the second quarter. Baker Mayfield is 4 for 8 for 25 yards, and their biggest rush has been by Chris Godwin. Josh Allen is 11 for 13 for 129, but they've not been able to punch it in. And right now, the ball is in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' hands at their own 3-yard line. So something to just kind of like pay attention to while you're there. See if that ends up translating anything else. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up the show today. I appreciate all y'all. Y'all are all amazing. We're going to have our live show following the game, obviously. And I hope y'all have enjoyed it. Again, I'm not really predicting the New Orleans Saints to win until we see an offensive identity. But I do think that this is a good matchup for a team. They're going against a less talented team than what they just faced. They're coming off a mini bye. And hopefully that translates to a win because the New Orleans Saints are desperate for a win. If they don't win this one, and they drop to 3-5, it's really tough to believe things are going to change. But they're coming with a mini bye, coming in the away game. We'll see how it goes. If the New Orleans Saints defense can hold the Colts below 20 points, which would be the first time the Colts offense has not scored 20 points this season, Saints very much could win. Who dat? God bless, love, and appreciate every single one of you. You're all amazing. Deuces. That's me. Catch you on the next one. We're out.